Welcome to the first of our live streams this Easter weekend. It is great to have you with us. Here at Cambridge Park, we are going to be reading the real story of 3 days that changed the world. Today, we'll be reading the first of these stories, seeing what Jesus did the night before he died. Could you imagine being in Jesus' shoes, knowing that you were facing death the next day? What would you do? How would you feel? We're going to start off tonight with a song before David brings us this reading and some reflections on why it was such a world-changing event. Then we're going to sing again before praying to bring us to a close. This first song that we're going to sing is called The Glories of Calvary. Calvary was an old word used to describe the place where Jesus died. So please, sing along if you feel comfortable, or just listen to The Glories of Calvary.
Lord, you're calling me to come and behold the wondrous cross, to explore the depths of grace that came to me at such a cost, where your boundless love conquered my boundless sin, and mercy's arms were open wide. My heart is filled with 1,000 songs, proclaiming the glories of Calvary. With every breath, Lord, how I long to sing of Jesus who died for me. Lord, take me deeper into the glories of Calvary. Find eternal joy in the triumph of the wounds by our Savior's crimson flow. Holy wrath has been removed, and your saints below join with your saints above, rejoicing in the risen Lamb. My heart is filled with 1,000 songs, proclaiming the glories of Calvary. With every breath, Lord, how I long to sing of Jesus who died for me. Oh, my heart is filled with 1,000 songs, proclaiming the glories of Calvary. With every breath, Lord, how I long to sing of Jesus who died. Lord, take me deeper into the glories of Calvary. For all eternity, we will sing worthy. Our God has set us free. We'll sing the glories of Calvary. For all eternity, so we will sing about His love forever. We will sing the God of heaven sent His Son to die for us. And with the saints of all the ages, we'll sing the glories of Calvary.
Well, hello from me. My name's David Sheed. It's great to be with you here online tonight. Here we are, all shut away at home, doing our best to keep each other safe and well. It's such a different, such an unforeseen world we're living in, isn't it? Who could have imagined, say, this time last year, what life would be like today? How much everything would have changed. This time last year, you might have just got back from a day at the Easter show or been packing to go away on holidays. But now here you are, working out how not to go stir crazy as you're cooped up at home. And so maybe you've even joined our live stream here tonight, something just a couple of months ago that wouldn't have even crossed your mind, because, well, why not? What else is there? What a difference a couple of months can make. But as strange and as difficult as this time now is, there may just be something good to come out of it all, something fantastic. You see, we're calling this Easter online series 3 Days That Changed the World, because all of the changes that we've experienced in our world recently, well, it's nothing compared to the biggest change that's ever happened in the world. A change so big that its effects are still with us more than 2,000 years later. And it may just be that this weekend those events will change your world, will change your life forever. At least that's what I'm hoping will happen for you as we listen together to the story of the most incredible 3 days in all of human history. You see, the events of Easter, the suffering and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, well, for many of us, they're pretty familiar, aren't they? So Jesus died on the cross. Yeah, he came back to life. We know all about that, don't we? What's the big deal? Well, that's what I'd like to show you this weekend. Because part of us already knows what a big deal these things are, don't we? If someone in your life, someone in your family, let's call him Uncle Bill, if he died and you had the funeral and you buried him and you went away to grieve and to slowly move on, but then if a couple of days after Uncle Bill knocked on your door and he said, "Look, I'm back," well, that'd be something extraordinary, wouldn't it? Something unbelievably, incomprehensibly amazing. Uncle Bill back from the dead. And we're not talking about one of those, near-death experiences you sometimes hear about. His heart stopped beating on the operating table and the doctors managed to revive him and so on. No, he had a funeral, he was buried, the dirt was poured over his coffin, unbreathing, unmoving, dead for several days, and then he came back. Wouldn't that be absolutely the biggest thing ever? And that's the claim that Christians have been making for 2,000 years, that Jesus Christ died, he was buried, and that he came back from the dead. The absolutely most amazing, most awesome thing ever. But there's much more to the story than even that. Because unlike your remarkable Uncle Bill, with Jesus, it wasn't just his resurrection from the dead that was so massive, but his suffering and his death before that, they were equally massive. See, just as no one else in history has come back from the dead like Jesus, so also no one else in history has suffered and died in the same way and with the same earth-shattering effect that Jesus did. And let me just give you a spoiler for something we're going to hear a little bit more about tomorrow, of what happened the moment when Jesus died. This is what an eyewitness account says. It says, "Then Jesus shouted out again, and he released his spirit. And at that moment, the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, rocks split apart, and tombs opened. And the bodies of many godly men and women who had died were raised from the dead, They left the cemetery after Jesus' resurrection, went into the holy city of Jerusalem, and appeared to many people. That's what happened when Jesus died. That's the effect Jesus' death had. And even that's not all of it. His suffering, his death, his resurrection achieved so much more. So much that it is simply extraordinary. These were 3 days that literally changed the world forever. The biggest 3 days of all time. And so what we're going to do tonight and tomorrow and then again on Sunday morning is to take the time just to hear again, as if for the very first time, the story of those 3 days. An account written by one of Jesus' original friends and followers and an eyewitness of everything that happened, a man by the name of Matthew. And so I'm going to read Matthew's story for you in 3 short installments and ask you to listen and to reflect on it. And I would recommend that you just try to listen. Whether that means closing your eyes as long as you don't fall asleep or doodling on a pad or whatever. I'd suggest to any kids watching that you could draw what you're hearing or draw how the story makes you feel. But do whatever it is that's going to most help you to get into the story. Because you may just find that this is a story that changes your life forever. And so in a moment I'm going to read the first installment, the first chapter of that story for you. But first let me just set the scene a little bit and highlight a few things for you to be watching out for as you listen to the story. And the first thing is to notice how real, how true to life all the people in the story are. Matthew hasn't tried to Photoshop anyone's flaws out. We get everyone just as they are, warts and all. And such a range of people. There are the Jewish religious leaders with their power politics and scheming and backroom deals who are determined to kill Jesus. Who cares if he's done anything to deserve it or not? They'll cook up any old lies to pin on him. And then there's their accomplice, Judas, who Matthew twice reminds us is one of Jesus' 12 closest followers. But his greed drives him to betray his master and to betray him in such a terrible way by pretending to be his friend, betraying him with a kiss. And then on the other side of the coin we meet a woman who is so devoted to Jesus, so grateful to him, that she anoints him with an incredibly valuable and expensive jar of perfume. And then there are, of course, his disciples, his followers, who've been with him by now for about 3 years or so, but who still don't have a clue what's going on, really, and who flee in terror when Jesus is arrested and everything starts going, well, as far as they're concerned, pear-shaped. These are real people, you see, responding to real events, to this totally strange mess and confusion of things that seem to be going on. And that's the second thing then, to notice how confusing this must have all seemed at the time. The grateful woman, she pours out tens of thousands of dollars worth of perfume over Jesus. I mean, think how many poor people that could have fed. And yet Jesus insists that she's doing the right thing, that by preparing his body like this for burial. Now, what on earth's he talking about there? And then when he's alone with his disciples for the Passover meal, the Last Supper, he suddenly blurts out to them that one of them is going to betray him. I mean, who would do that? The thought hasn't even crossed their mind. And even when Judas asks Jesus, "Surely it's not me?" Jesus' answer to him is weird. "You've said it," he says. Well, what's Judas said? That it is him or that it isn't? And then at the Passover meal itself, an event that the Jews had been celebrating for about 1500 years, as an annual reminder of what God had done to rescue their ancestors from slavery. Well, now Jesus says that this meal is about him and about a covenant, an agreement between God and his people that'll be sealed with Jesus' blood. What is that? And then he tells his disciples that they're all going to abandon him. Them? Now? They've stuck by him for 3 years. They're prepared to fight for him to the death. But Jesus insists, no, you won't. And then it all goes crazy. Out of the blue, soldiers turn up to arrest him, and Jesus is carted off to a joke of a midnight trial. The Jewish leaders looking for anyone to say whatever kind of lies about Jesus they can think of. The whole place just in chaos and uproar. This is a massively messy and confusing night. Who knows what's going on? Well, and here's the third thing to look out for. Jesus does. In the middle of all of this confusion and chaos, Jesus stands out clearly from the rest. He's the only one who's calmly and consistently in control. He knows, he teaches about, he predicts everything that happens. At his trial, he even goes so far as to give the Jewish leaders the excuse they'd been looking for to convict him after all of their lies had failed. In fact, there's only one time when we see Jesus struggling and distressed, and that's at the most intense moment in today's episode. When in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus has to make the most difficult and the most important decision anyone's ever had to make in the history of the world. Will he, the beloved Son of God, stand in the path of the fury of God against all human wickedness for all time? Either he takes the full force of God's judgment on himself, or else the whole world is lost forever. Either he drinks the cup of God's wrath, or we do. This is a decision that causes Jesus unimaginable agony, almost more painful than the cross itself. To say to his eternal Father, okay, give it to me. Hit me with everything you've got. Turn your back on me in judgment. And tragically, at this moment, right when he needed the support of his friends the most, they're oblivious, they're sleeping. Jesus suffered more than anyone has ever suffered, and he did it alone. But of course, he did it. He made that awful choice. And from then on, he is totally calm and in control. He knows where he's headed, and he goes for it. Where everyone else fails, Jesus passes the sternest test of all. The difference between him and the rest is just massive. So, 3 things to look out for. Real people behaving how real people do, the messy confusion of everything that happened, and the absolute contrast that is Jesus. In incredible agony in Gethsemane, but everywhere else in complete and total control. 3 things to look out for. And as well as that, very briefly, 1 question to consider. And that is, what do you make of all of this? What do you make of Jesus and of all that he went through? What's your response when you hear the story? Okay, so now listen as I read to you episode 1 of 3 Days That Changed the World. And I've called this episode, The King Suffers. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "As you know, the Passover begins in 2 days, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." At that same time, the leading priests and elders were meeting at the residence of Caiaphas, the high priest, plotting how to capture Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the Passover celebration, they agreed, or the people may riot. Meanwhile, Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon, a man who had previously had leprosy. While he was eating, a woman came in with a beautiful alabaster jar of expensive perfume and poured it over his head. The disciples were indignant when they saw this. "What a waste," they said. "It could have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, replied, "Why criticize this woman for doing such a beautiful thing to me? You'll always have the poor among you, but you'll not always have me. She has poured this perfume on me to prepare my body for burial. I tell you the truth, wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed." Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priests and asked, "How much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you?" And they gave him 30 pieces of silver. And from that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to prepare the Passover meal for you?" As you go into the city, he told them, "you'll see a certain man. Tell him, 'The teacher says my time has come, and I will eat the Passover meal with my disciples at your house.'" So the disciples did as Jesus told them and prepared the Passover meal there. When it was evening, Jesus sat down at the table with the 12. And while they were eating, he said, "I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me." Greatly distressed, each one asked in turn, "Surely it's not me, Lord?" He replied, "One of you who has just eaten from this bowl will betray me. For the Son of Man must die, as the Scriptures declared long ago. But how terrible it will be for the one who betrays him. It would be far better for that man if he had never been born." Judas, the one who would betray him, also asked, "Rabbi, surely it's not me?" And Jesus told him, "You've said it." As they were eating, Jesus took some bread and blessed it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this and eat it, for this is my body." And he took a cup of wine and gave thanks to God for it. He gave it to them and said, "Each of you drink from it, for this is my blood, which confirms the covenant between God and his people. It's poured out as a sacrifice to forgive the sins of many. Mark my words, I will not drink wine again until the day I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." Then they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. On the way, Jesus told them, "Tonight, all of you will desert me. For the Scriptures say, God will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I've been raised from the dead, I will go ahead of you to Galilee and meet you there." But Peter declared, "Even if everyone else deserts you, I will never desert you." Jesus replied, "I tell you the truth, Peter. This very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." "No," Peter insisted. "Even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you." And all the other disciples vowed the same. Then Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and he said, "Sit here while I go over there to pray." He took Peter and Zebedee's 2 sons, James and John, and he became anguished and distressed. He told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." He went on a little further and bowed with his face to the ground, praying, "My Father, if it's possible, let this cup be taken away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." Then he returned to the disciples and found them asleep. He said to Peter, "Couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray so that you'll not give in to temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak." Then Jesus left them a second time and prayed, "My Father, if this cup cannot be taken away unless I drink it, your will be done." When he returned to them again, he found them sleeping, for they couldn't keep their eyes open. So he went to pray a third time, saying the same things again. And then he came to the disciples, and he said, "Go ahead and sleep. Have your rest. But look, the time has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let's be going. Look, my betrayer is here." And even as Jesus said this, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived with a crowd of men armed with swords and clubs. They'd been sent by the leading priests and elders of the people, and the traitor Judas had given them a prearranged signal. "You will know which one to arrest when I greet him with a kiss." So Judas came straight to Jesus. "Greetings, Rabbi," he exclaimed, and gave him a kiss. And Jesus said, "My friend, go ahead and do what you have come for." Then the others grabbed Jesus and arrested him. But one of the men with Jesus pulled out his sword and struck the high priest's slave, slashing off his ear. "Put away your sword," Jesus told him. "Those who use the sword will die by the sword. Don't you realize that I could ask my Father for thousands of angels to protect us, and he would send them instantly? But if I did, how would the scriptures be fulfilled that describe what must happen now?" Then Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I some dangerous revolutionary that you come with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there teaching every day." But this is all happening to fulfill the words of the prophets as recorded in the scriptures. And at that point, all the disciples deserted him and fled. Then the people who had arrested Jesus led him to the home of Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of religious law and the elders had gathered. Meanwhile, Peter followed him at a distance and came to the high priest's courtyard. He went in and sat with the guards and waited to see how it would all end. Inside, the leading priests and the entire ruling council were trying to find witnesses who would lie about Jesus so that they could put him to death. But even though they found many who agreed to give false witness, they couldn't use anyone's testimony. Finally, 2 men came forward who declared, "This man said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days.'" Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Well, aren't you going to answer these charges? What do you have to say for yourself?" But Jesus remained silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I demand in the name of the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus replied, "You've said it. And in the future, you will see the Son of Man seated in the place of power at God's right hand and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothing to show his horror and said, "Blasphemy! Why do we need other witnesses? You've all heard his blasphemy. What's your verdict?" "Guilty," they shouted. "He deserves to die." And then they began to spit in Jesus' face and beat him with their fists. And some slapped him, jeering, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who hit you that time?" Meanwhile, Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came over and said to him, "You were one of those with Jesus the Galilean." But Peter denied it in front of everyone. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Later, out by the gate, another servant girl noticed him and said to those standing round, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again Peter denied it, this time with an oath. "I don't even know the man," he said. A little later, some of the other bystanders came over to Peter and said, "You must be one of them. We can tell by your Galilean accent." Peter swore, "A curse on me if I'm lying. I don't know the man." And immediately the rooster crowed. Suddenly, Jesus' words flashed through Peter's mind. "Before the rooster crows, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." And he went outside and wept bitterly. So, what do you make of that? What do you make of Jesus and what he went through here? I called this episode "The King Suffers," and in Gethsemane that was certainly true. He suffered there to a degree that you and I can't even imagine. We might listen to the story and think, well, the arrest, the beatings, or we'll come back tomorrow and we'll hear about the crucifixion, and we'll think about all of the physical pain and agree that Jesus suffered. But the physical pain was nothing compared to Jesus' true suffering. That intense struggle at Gethsemane. "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death." The agonizing decision he took to face the full brunt of God's anger against all human rebellion and disobedience. To be rejected by his eternal Father. You and I have never known suffering like that. And even more than that, he chose to do it. He didn't shy away, but he set out, eyes wide open, right into the fury of God. He could have bailed at any time. As he said, "I could ask my Father for thousands of angels to protect us." But he didn't. He chose what he chose and he stuck to it. Which is why he could be so calm in the middle of all the turmoil. What difference did it make what they did to him? He was headed for something infinitely worse, but something he was determined to do. And so in this story, and we'll see it again tomorrow, Jesus stands out as the most sane and rational person out of all of them. And the disciples panic. Peter's confused. The Jewish council is in an uproar. And yet Jesus remains in control. When they accuse him falsely, he doesn't answer. When they've given up, he himself gives them the rope they wanted to hang him by. This is the path he chose, and he was going to follow it to the end. And quite unbelievably, he did this for us. His choice, his suffering, was in our place, taking on himself all of God's anger and judgment against us, drinking the cup with your name on it and mine. As he said at the Last Supper, "This is my blood which confirms the covenant, God's commitment to his people. It's poured out as a sacrifice to forgive the sins of many." That's Jesus. That's what he went through. That's what he committed himself to. And so the question now is, how do you respond? In today's episode, there are only 2 options. There are those who abandon Jesus, whether out of fear, like his disciples, the fear of what they might suffer if they stick with him, or whether out of pride and wickedness like Judas and the Jewish leaders. The pride that says, who does Jesus think he is? God's king to rule over me? I don't need him. I'm going to be rid of him and run the show my own way. Abandonment, doing away with him. That's one way to respond. But there's another way, and in this episode, the alternative to abandonment is tears. Peter is, of course, our example here. Yes, Peter failed. He abandoned Jesus just like everyone else. And to be honest, actually, I think if we were in his shoes, we would have done the same. In fact, Peter probably did better than we would have done, because think about it. Peter gets this bad press for denying Jesus, but where were the other disciples? They'd long since vanished. Yes, Peter denied Jesus, but at least he made it far enough that he was able to deny him. He's by far the best of a bad bunch. And yet even the best here is a total failure. But then, when he realized what he'd done, how did Peter respond? He went outside and he wept bitterly. You know, given everything that had taken place, I can't think of a better thing to do than that. Can you? How hard we often find it to admit our failure. And we're so quick to find excuses or justifications for turning away from Jesus. But in this case, admitting our failure is absolutely the best thing we can do. Like the whole human race, every one of us constantly ignores and rejects God and his rule over us. We're all lost. We all deserve his judgment. But you know, as long as we refuse to face the bitter truth, we cut ourselves off from the only way out of the mess we're in. Jesus died for us so that God can forgive us and restore us to a new and perfect relationship with himself. That was exactly the awesome choice that Jesus made, to take our failure on himself so as to become our rescuer and our king. All that he asks is that we let go of our stubborn pride, that, like Peter, we acknowledge that we've messed up, and that we come to Jesus, trusting him to forgive us and to make us new. And you know the best thing? He has solemnly promised that he will do just that, with a promise sealed in his blood. I mean, what better guarantee can you get than that? So, come to Jesus with tears of sorrow, with tears of thankfulness, and put your trust, your confidence in him from this day forward. Let's pray. Our loving Heavenly Father, we thank you for Jesus, for the choice that he took to suffer in our place. We thank you that all our failures can be forgiven by him. And we ask that you would teach us to come to him and to trust him from now on. And we pray this in his name. Amen. We're going to have another song now. Again, feel free to join in and sing, or just to listen, if that's what you would prefer. This is a song that's called How Deep. It's singing about the depths of Jesus' love and mercy towards us, and the thankfulness that overflows from our hearts in response. So enjoy this song.
You were broken that I might be healed.
Please join with me as we spend some more time praying to our great God. Father, we pray for our world in this moment of great anxiety and fear. Thank you that in your great timing, we get to spend this weekend remembering all that you have done for us through your Son. Let this message bring us deep comfort, knowing that we can be safe and secure in you. Help us to put all of our hope in you, not trying to find security in the things of this world that you have shown bring none. Help us to share your message throughout the world, spreading this hope to those who are struggling without it. Father, as we grieve the loss of normal life, not being able to spend Easter with our families, give us self-control and obedience, that we might follow the rules of the government and help in stopping the spread of this virus. Help us to find other ways of supporting one another, showing love as you have shown us. Give us wisdom in using technology, that we would be able to continue speaking words of encouragement to one another. Help our governments as they continue to make tough decisions on how to manage our country and state. Give them wisdom in decision-making, endurance to keep working, and patience as they manage opponents. For those who continue to work in various essential services, help them to find moments of rest between shifts. Help us as their patients, customers, and friends to be spurring them on as they face rising pressures. Father, in all that happens this weekend, let us rejoice, reflecting on your great sacrifice. Amen. Well, thank you for joining us this evening for the first episode of 3 Days That Changed the World. As the title suggests, there is more to come, so please join us again tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for episode 2, and again on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. for the final episode. Have a good evening, and see you then.